On Campus with Gary McCaleb. Tonight's guest is Dr. Larry Bradshaw, Director of Broadcasting at Abilene Christian University. He'll be talking about ACU's new FM station. Here's Gary McCaleb.
On campus today, we're pleased to welcome Dr. Larry Bradshaw, Director of Broadcasting at Abilene Christian University. Thank you for being with us, and congratulations on the news of the ACU station now being National Public Broadcasting.
We're real excited about it, Gary. We've been planning now for about 3 years for a new FM station for Abilene, and at the core of that proposal has been our desire to bring National Public Radio to Abilene for the first time.
Tell us a little bit about how this all came about, because obviously things like this sometimes appear to have just fallen out of the sky, but in this case I know that wasn't exactly the way it happened.
No, not at all. In fact, we'd have to go back about 30 years, I guess, if we really told the whole story of radio here at ACU. In fact, a young guy by the name of Bill Teague was involved early on with KACU back in the early 50s. Dr. Lowell Perry, many people in Abilene are familiar with him, was instrumental in building KACC back in those days. And, of course, he died in a plane crash in 1977. And for the past 3 or 4 years, ACU has considered the possibility of branching off the campus. We have a small campus station now, but serving the entire area of West Texas. And so we decided to apply for an FCC permit to build a high-power FM station, and we received that last June.
You know, this really is quite a step from the past level of broadcasting to the present, isn't it? How would you describe the significance of the movement from KACU to this public broadcasting station?
Well, I have to try hard to convince our students that we have a real radio station, because when it only goes to the dorms and to the campus union, they feel like, well, maybe nobody out there is listening. When we begin broadcasting early in 1986, we'll have a potential audience of 150,000 in this area. And, of course, that many people won't be listening at any one time, but it will be a very powerful signal and a very good signal, a high-quality signal, stereo. And so there won't be any more need for me to convince them that this is not play radio.
What will be the number on the dial? Do you know that yet?
Yes, we're at 89.7 megahertz, which is on the left-hand side of the FM dial. The 88 through 92 frequencies are reserved through for educational broadcasting.
Now, when you say that you have a national public broadcasting station, this becomes a part of, would you call this a network? The same as you have ABC and CBS and your various networks? In
television, you know, there are 3 commercial networks and then the public broadcasting service. In radio, you have ABC, NBC, CBS, and RKO, a number of networks, and then you have National Public Radio. It's a network, 325 stations around the country, and they tend to be university-affiliated type stations. It's a little bit different from the commercial networks that people might be familiar with. A lot of people have called me since they found out we're going on the air, who lived in other communities, and said, man, we're so excited about having NPR because they got used to it in the bigger cities that they might have lived in.
I've heard the same thing from people who've, and some people who've said they're surprised that there was no National Public Radio in Abilene until now.
You know, that's really interesting. Abilene is one of the largest metropolitan areas in the country without a National Public Radio signal.
Why is that? Was there a reason for that?
Well, I think one of the reasons was that there's no 4-year state college in this area, and most of the university-affiliated stations are state universities. And it really took a big move, a big jump for ACU to take on the responsibility of building the station. It's going to be very expensive, but I think it will be a real treat for the people in the Abilene area.
So are you suggesting it's not the norm that a private university would be involved in National Public Radio?
There are quite a few private universities. For example, Friends University in Wichita has a public radio station, and there are several like that. But most of them are state university type stations.
Do you depend then on a network central office to provide you with a certain amount of programming, a certain percent of the total programming, or?
We will be what's called an auxiliary member. They have established a special membership for the smaller stations, and that means if you have fewer than 150,000 in your viewing area, you qualify for an auxiliary membership. And as an auxiliary member, we can take any portion of NPR programming that we want, all of it, 10% of it, or whatever we want to use. By the way, there are 149,000 people in our viewing area, so we are right under the limit, and it saves us about $10,000 a year in network fees.
In other words, if you had been over 150,000, you would not have had that option?
Yeah, that's right. We would have to pay about $26,000 a year just to get the network. As it is, we'll be down around $15,000 a year.
What would it have meant in programming if you had been over?
Really no difference. That's the advantage of the auxiliary membership. We can run any part of it that we want to.
How many hours a day will you be broadcasting?
Well, we're going to begin at 6 in the morning and go till midnight 7 days a week.
Wow, that's a lot of
It's a lot. It's 128 hours a week, I believe it is, that we'll be on the air.
Now, how does that impact the students who are working in radio?
It means they're going to have to get out of bed at 5 o'clock in the morning. Well, because we do have a large group of student broadcast majors here at ACU, we'll be able to staff the station largely with students, our more advanced students. We'll have a professional staff that will be involved with the station and direct the students, but much of the on-the-air work will actually be done by our junior and senior students.
How would you describe the kind of programming? You know, they talk about radio stations as being easy listening or news or various kinds of things. How would you describe the programming in general?
We're in the process right now of developing a format for the station. Most public radio stations have the idea that we'll try to provide services that are not available on the commercial stations. So right off the bat, we probably won't be doing any country music. We probably won't be doing any hard rock, because that's available already in Abilene from some fine stations in this area. Our idea right now is to go with heavy news and information, and programs like All Things Considered and Morning Edition, which are NPR programs. We'll begin our day at 6 in the morning and conclude our information part, a 90-minute program each evening at 4:30. We'll do quite a bit of local news. In addition, Tim Graham, who used to be the news director at KORQ, has joined us, and he's setting up a news department that will be very active. Throughout the day, we'll be probably a soft adult format that's not really available anywhere in Abilene right now. And then at night will be classical, which of course is not available. And we're real excited about that because there's so many people who love classical music, and especially people associated with the 3 universities in this town. And so we think that will be a needed sort of service. Then we can do some special programs. For example, jazz. There's quite a bit of interest in jazz. And we're just going to kind of find out what the needs are in the community and try to meet them.
Do you have any constraints placed upon you by the National Public Broadcasting about what programming you can do or that you may not do on this station?
Not really. NPR doesn't really place any restrictions on us. Now, we did receive a federal grant to help us build the station of about $200,000 from the Department of Commerce, and that grant specifies that we are not to do any advocacy religious programming, so we won't have any preachers, that sort of thing, on our station. We really didn't want to do that anyway. That's not our purpose. We can have religious music and really any kind of music that we would like to air, we can do that. But as far as making it a proselyting type of thing, we have no intention of doing that.
So you're going to be broadcasting about 18 hours a day,
right,
or exactly 18 hours a day,
right,
I suppose. About how much of that time will be, say, news, or how much of that time will be music?
Well, I'd say about 4 or 5 hours a day of news. We'll probably do a local news block around noon, and we'll do local inserts in the morning edition and All Things Considered. So perhaps a third of our programming will be news and information, but really information's a lot broader than that. They have documentaries, outstanding prize-winning, award-winning documentaries that are available to us and on major national problems, and it's something that, unless you really heard NPR, you'll just really be surprised at the quality the programming that's available. So it won't all be just straight news.
Will you get? How will you get the programming? Will it be direct and live programming?
That's right.
That they'll feed into you?
NPR is one of the pioneers in satellite distribution of their programming. And so we'll have a dish that will actually pick the signal up off of a satellite, which is in geosynchronous orbit 23,000 miles above the equator. And our programming will be instant and live. Now, some of it is tape delayed. For example, concerts and opera and so forth will be taped and aired at a later time. But all of our news programming will be, virtually all of it will be live as you're hearing it.
Do you know how old the concept of national public broadcasting is?
Well, it goes back about 15 or 20 years. It really experienced its biggest growth in just the last few years. All Things Considered, for example, began in 1971, so it's almost 15 years old. Before National Public Radio, there was a network of college radio stations that provided a service, but it's a fairly recent development in just the last 15 years or so.
Now, you're not considered to be I guess what you'd call a commercial radio station.
That's right, and that's a good point. I'm glad you brought that up, because we're not competing with the existing stations in town. We're not trying to go after their advertising or their audience, basically. We think we'll be building a new audience, one that really doesn't have any opportunity for the kind of programming they like right now. And we will be doing some underwriting, where we contact businesses and individuals and ask them to provide us with some money in exchange for the use of their name, just like public broadcasting does. This program sponsored in part by Mobil or Ford Motor Company or whatever. But I don't think we'll be a real competition, and we won't be doing any commercials. That's one of the advantages, in a way, of National Public Radio, is that it's not interrupted. Programs are not interrupted for commercials.
No commercials in news, music, or at any time.
That's right. At the beginning of each hour, we'll say, this program brought to you in part by Texas Instruments, or whoever, West Texas Utilities, something like that. But we won't have any commercials as such in the middle of any program. We will be doing some fundraising. I want to warn the public, it's going to cost us about $100,000 a year to operate this station. The power alone, for example, to operate as big a transmitter as we have is $12,000 a year. So we will be doing fundraising a couple times a year.
This is on top of the funding that you were speaking about a while ago.
That's right. The funding that we have right now is just to build the station, put the transmitter on, erect the tower, and so forth.
So that's a one-time
That's right.
funding. It's not anything that's continuing over the years.
That's right.
Yeah. And so you mean that from that point forward, it's up to just the local station to finance its own operation, and yet it's doing it without any advertising?
Yes. Now, the underwriting serves in part for that, and then we will develop a friends organization where we ask people to be members or friends of public radio, and we'll get a large part of our funding from those people.
We need to take a break here for just a minute, then we'll come back and continue to talk some more about the National Public Broadcasting.
Good.
So we're visiting today with Dr. Larry Bradshaw.
Abilene Christian University began with a handful of students in 1906 as an ungraded school. Today, ACU is one of the largest privately supported universities in the Southwest, with more than 4,500 students from nearly every state in the nation and several foreign countries. Here, the spiritual dimension is a way of life, in the classroom and in the chapel. This helps to make ACU a unique place, a place where people really matter.
We're back on campus and continuing to visit with Dr. Larry Bradshaw as we talk about the recent announcement that Abilene Christian University will soon be having a national public broadcasting station. By the way, what is the date
I knew you were going
that
to
you will
ask me.
first go on the air?
Well, if I get my crystal ball here and gaze into it, I see Tom Dolan, our engineer, working hard to get us on the air. We are shooting for early 1986. We don't want to be too specific, because every time I've been associated with the building of a station, it's always taken longer than we thought. You have delays in ordering equipment and so forth. But if you won't tell anybody, I'll suggest maybe March of '86 will be our target date.
Is the biggest factor in that the arrival and installation of the equipment, or are there other things that are the more controlling factors?
Really, there's no real restriction except that we do have to bid our equipment under the terms of the grant. That will take a little time. And then the transmitter has to be built after we order it to our specifications. That'll take a month or two. Takes quite a bit of time to build that big a tower and so forth. But there's really no reason that we couldn't get it all together in the next few months.
You brought with you a sample, I think, of some of the programming. Could you tell us a little about what you're going to play and then let us listen to it?
You bet. I'd be glad to. I won't play very much of this because otherwise we'd just be sitting here looking at each other while this was on. But this is a little sample of what the All Things Considered program, the award-winning news program that comes on each evening, sounds like. This little theme song has become well known to people who are public radio fans, and in about 6 months or so from the time you and I are talking, people will be able to hear this each evening, and I'll play just a little sample of it here. This is the theme and the beginning of All Things Considered.
From National Public Radio in Washington, I'm Susan Stamberg with the best of All Things Considered. Welcome to a special edition of All Things Considered. We have gone rummaging through our program archives and brought out some
That's Susan Stamberg, and she has become quite well known among journalists, broadcast journalists, won a number of awards, and she and Noah Adams do the anchoring on the All Things Considered program. It's kind of a laid-back newscast, Gary. It's a in-depth type of thing. You don't get quick little headline-type stories like you hear on other radio stations. You might hear a story, for example, on Nicaragua that will run 10 minutes in length, but it is so fascinating, so well researched, so well produced that you just sort of get caught up in it. And after 90 minutes of that program, it's sort of the equivalent of reading the New York Times from cover to cover. That's how I like to tell people.
You mentioned, or at least alluded earlier, to the idea of a board of directors.
That's right.
Could you explain a little more about that and how that will work?
You know, the people who gave us the grant were a little bit concerned that ACU, being a church-related school, might have a station that would just be kind of a self-serving type thing. And we tried to convince them that we weren't going to do that, and that wasn't our intention at all. And they said, well, maybe you could get an advisory board that would be composed of different members of the community. And we said, well, we'd be delighted to do that. And so we had 12 people who agreed to work with us on our advisory board. We have 4 members of the faculty from Hardin-Simmons. We have 3 members of the McMurray faculty. And we have some other people here in town who are community leaders who've expressed an interest in public radio and agreed to serve on our board to help us determine what the program needs are.
Now, what will be their role or their responsibility?
It's mainly to monitor our programming, to make sure that ACU is using the station for the public interest. If they heard a group of Church of Christ preachers on there, for example, they might say, well, that's not what the station was intended to be. And so they'll make a report to the grant agency at the end of each year. They'll also help us to come up with ideas for programs to meet the needs. There might be, for example, a minority group here in town that doesn't have any programming especially designed for them, and those ideas will come from that board.
Let me shift emphasis in our discussion here for a minute. Has it ever occurred to you that that we're talking about bringing a new station into Abilene at a time that most people would call the age of television? There was the age of radio, the time when people sat around their radio stations in the evening and listened for hours on end. Most people would probably agree that radio's role has changed in our society. Would you comment a little bit on what today's role for radio is and how a station like this fits into it in this television age?
You know, I think that it's probably incorrect to say there was the age of radio. I think this is the age of radio. A lot of people predicted that radio would just sort of dry up and blow away when television first came in, but that really hasn't been proven at all. In fact, there was an article in Newsweek magazine last spring called The Resurgence of Radio, and it was talking about how popular in some of the big markets radio has become and how valuable the commodities, the stations themselves, have become. I think that we will sort of resurrect an interest in radio. I think it's probably true that in Abilene right now, a lot of people don't sit around listening to radio at night. But when National Public Radio comes to Abilene, you're going to have lots of people who will turn the TV off and who will be listening to radio. And it's because it's a fresh and different kind of programming that just hasn't been available in this area at all. It goes back to what I was saying a while ago. We'll be creating a whole new audience that is perhaps not really interested in radio right now. So I think that in a way, television has sort of come to a point where it's spinning the same kind of mediocre quality programming.
In other words, you think it would be more accurate to say there was the age of television, but now we're in the age of radio?
In a way. For example, did you watch television last night?
I don't guess I did.
Did you watch it the night before?
Well, I don't watch television a lot.
Yeah, except at 7 o'clock on Channel 8.
Yeah, for this program.
But you know, if you'll ask somebody, did you watch TV last night, they'll say yes. Ask them to tell you what they saw. And most people don't have any idea. They watch television, they don't watch programs. And of course, now I teach television and I love television. I feel like it's a
See, I watch television
area.
for news, for the special news programming, for sports.
Right.
But as far as the, what you'd call entertainment programming, I guess,
Right.
I don't watch a lot of that. And so you're saying that this may work in complement with that kind of viewing of television, and that they won't really rival each other.
Truman Capote wrote a book, In Cold Blood, and you'll remember that book back about the murders in the state of Kansas. He spent 5 years doing research for that book, and after he finished the research, he said every farm home he went to in the state of Kansas had the television on, no matter what time of day it was. And growing up in Kansas, I can testify to that. Back in the 50s when we first got television, we were addicted to it. It was just on all the time. But I really think people are looking for something that is an alternative now, and it's refreshing to turn the TV off once in a while and do something different. And that's what we're going to be there for, people who want something different.
See, I've heard some say that television, or the radio now, has moved to the time that people listen to radio is in the car and with their little portable battery-powered units that they can carry around with them and so forth, but that they don't listen as much in the home. But you would not agree with that.
Well, I think that's probably true. I think that one of the problems is that many of the little home radios are not good enough quality, little tabletop type radios. And of course FM is in the ascendancy right now. Many FM signals don't get into the home. They get into a car fine, but they don't get into these little table radios. But this is also the age of the audiophile with massive stereo systems. And our signal will be state-of-the-art, and people who really love good classical or popular music will get a real bang out of listening to our station.
What's the best area for receiving this station? You were talking about a strong signal a while ago. How far out can people live in this area and still receive a good, strong signal?
We'll have a good signal for about 50 or 60 miles outside of Abilene. If you're in a car, you'll be able to pick it up 70 or 80 miles outside of, going toward Dallas or toward Midland. But if you live in a house or in an apartment building or something, 40 or 50, 60 miles will give you a real good, high-quality signal.
You know, when people listen to the radio, I've heard that the difference is they can listen to the radio and do something else. If you're watching television, it's not as easy to do something else. Will that still be the type of listener you'll have for this?
I've always thought that people sort of did the same thing when they're watching television. You know, it's sort of on. It's kind of like a companion. Marshall McLuhan said it's sort of like your mother. It just gives off this warmth, and you kind of curl up in a fetal position and maybe pay no attention to what's on, but it's just there.
But if you're watching television, you generally are expected to sit down and watch it. But you can be listening to radio and walking around the room, going down the hall, coming back, and you never lost contact with the radio station.
Well, in my house, there's a TV in the living room, one in my daughter's bedroom, and one in our bedroom. So wherever you go in the house, you
You're
can
still
see
listening.
the same dumb program,
Yeah.
or the same good program.
Yeah. When you talk about a profile of the people who will watch this program, is there an age range, income level, educational level, you know, that kind of thing that you would profile the typical listener for this station?
Yeah, I think we'll be definitely aimed toward a higher group in terms of education, perhaps in terms of income. There's not much of a teenage audience for NPR programming.
Mm-hmm.
It's an adult-type station.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say we would probably be strongest in 25 to 49-year-old, more highly educated people. But you'd be surprised there are some people who don't have a lot of formal education who love classical music or who love radio drama or who really get into in-depth news. And so you sometimes cut across those categories.
If you were going to predict, when would you predict would be the highest listening hour or time of your 18 hours of broadcasting during a day?
Well, these news programs, all things considered in Morning Edition, are traditionally the highest rated programs on NPR. You have a loyal, smaller but loyal group of classical music fans. I mean, they are fanatics, you know, they listen every night when you come on and so forth. But the most people are interested in NPR because of its news and public affairs programming.
Mm-hmm. I heard that the idea of National Public Broadcasting is that they want to be able to get to a point where a person can be anywhere in the United States and be able to pick up an NPR station, and that this represents filling in one more piece of the puzzle where that had not been true in the past.
That's true. There's a station in Austin, there's a station in Dallas, there's a station in El Paso, but there's nothing between Dallas and El Paso. So we are really filling a large block in West Texas that doesn't have any access to NPR right now. San Antonio, interestingly enough, has just gotten its first NPR signal. And that was the largest city in the United States without an NPR station up until this year.
And every state at this point has at least one, and we're now something like the 12th station in Texas.
That's right.
Like that. How close is that process being completed?
Well, there'll be large areas of West Texas that will never be served by NPR because there are just so few people.
Mm-hmm.
But any city over 100,000, there are very few of those cities left without an NPR signal. It may come in from another city, or it might be on a translator, but they at least have access to it.
Mm-hmm.
Congress wants everybody to
So
be
the
able
major
to-
population centers
That's right.
are pretty well covered at this point.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, it's a most interesting project, and our congratulations go to you and the others that have been working with you on the successful completion of your application, at least, and now it's down to the work of getting it put
That's right.
together and on the air, and we'll be looking forward to that day.
Well, we are too, and we'll be able to serve needs like the City Council, which you're interested in, perhaps broadcast City Council meetings. So it's an exciting opportunity.
Good. Thank you very much for being
You
with
bet.
us today. And thank you for being with us on campus with Dr. Larry Bradshaw.